600,000 people in the United States have died from COVID-19, the virus, and it has been an especially devastating impact on the millions of Americans with diabetes. And so many people have diabetes or are borderline diabetic that this story impacts at least a third of the country. More than 738,000 children and adults in Indiana suffer from all forms of diabetes. And joining us now is Jonathan Bailor, a New York Times bestselling author and founder, CEO of an evidence-based wellness program called SANESolution. He's dedicated his life to educating people about diabetes and how to regulate their blood sugar levels. And Jonathan, we're thrilled you're here. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well.
This sounds like a personal mission for you to educate people about diabetes. Why is that?
My grandfather died horribly after refusing to have his leg amputated when I was about 5 years old. This was caused by diabetes-induced sepsis, because diabetes is, of course, the leading cause of avoidable amputations and blindness in our country. And I heard this all going on. It was a terrible, traumatic experience, and I dedicated my life to preventing that suffering, if at all possible.
Wow, and that's when you were 5 years old.
Hearing your grandfather scream, "Don't let them take my leg," from a hospital room is not a pleasant memory.
Wow. I'm particularly interested in this story as well, because I think that in this day and age, we all know someone diagnosed with diabetes, whether we work with them or it's a family member. But are people with diabetes more likely to get COVID?
People with diabetes have a very severe disease, and we really need to take a step back and understand. For instance, we just released this film called Better with Harvard Medical School, where we explore what Dr. David Ludwig, who's a professor at Harvard Medical School, calls the complete metabolic meltdown caused by diabetes. So diabetes is not like a common cold. Diabetes is framed as this disease that can be managed. Diabetes is diabolical, and anyone who's suffering from diabetes is at increased risk for myriad complications, including severe COVID infections and death. So this has been happening for decades now, this epidemic of diabetes, but now, because we have another pandemic layered on top of it, this diabetes epidemic is really having a light shown on it, and the deadly consequences couldn't be more clear.
You know, we've heard that if diabetes runs in your family, it's something to pay attention to. And for you, that was a grandfather, so I'm sure you're carefully monitoring. But do you think that you can prevent it?
Diabetes is type 2 diabetes, the one that's the most common, is absolutely preventable. And the reason we know this definitively is if you look back 100 years ago, which seems like a long time ago, but it's not ultimately that long ago, about 1 in every 4,000 people was estimated to have type 2 diabetes. Today, that number is more like 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 that have diabetes or prediabetes. That's a 100,000% increase. So it can't just be genetic. Our genetics didn't change 100,000% in the past 100 years. It has to do with the types of foods that are being put into our bodies, and we can control that, and we can take back the power, and we can reverse this disease.
Jonathan Bailor is with us, founder and CEO of the world's fastest-growing evidence-based wellness program, SANESolution. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But this is what really led me to call you, and that is because of the information about some people that are surviving COVID-19 that may lead to lasting medical concerns, which we've heard of, but this includes newly diagnosed diabetes. And so, do you understand what's going on?
It's really important to understand that there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that COVID-19 causes diabetes.
Okay.
We do have evidence to suggest, we know a tremendous number, tens of millions of individuals have diabetes and are not diagnosed yet, and an additional 90 million more have prediabetes and are not diagnosed. So if you think about it that way, you haven't gotten the medical attention you need. Let's imagine you get a COVID diagnosis and you're rushed to the ICU. Then they notice you're diabetic or pre-diabetic. So it's really important to understand the chain of events there.
Okay.
COVID didn't cause the diabetes. COVID caused the discovery of a disease that already existed, and the fact that the disease already existed is probably why you're in the ICU with a COVID infection, because that underlying condition causes COVID to hit you so much harder. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it absolutely does, because a lot of people are finding out they have other things going on with them when they've contracted COVID-19. And so now I get that headline that I've been reading that says, you know, what's going on? Newly diagnosed diabetes from COVID-19. Now I get why. So, Jonathan, we need to make it clear that you're not a doctor, but do you know if getting the vaccine or COVID can cause sugar levels to spike?
While I am not a doctor, we're incredibly blessed with probably the most reliable and robust medical data in the world here in the United States. And we see very clearly that the COVID vaccine is not only safe, but more important for individuals who have diabetes. Why? If you have diabetes, we now know definitively your risk of death and being in the intensive care unit if you get COVID is dramatically higher. Therefore, the risks of COVID are astronomically higher if you have diabetes. Therefore, getting the vaccine is astronomically more important if you have diabetes.
Okay. All right. And if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, what do you need to do right now to fortify your immune system as these new COVID variants continue to emerge?
The number one thing you can do is to educate yourself on how to make better food choices. Not perfect food choices, but better food choices. Because, for example, in this documentary that we just released with Harvard Medical School called Better, we show conclusively that by selecting different, better foods, we can take back control of our health, radically reduce our risk of diabetes, and in some cases, even dramatically drop all blood markers that would indicate that you even have a diabetes diagnosis in the first place.
Jonathan Bailor is with us. He's a healthy living expert. SANESolution.com. So as I started out our conversation, I mentioned that this is really a personal mission for you, educating people about diabetes. And so what is SANE Solution?
As you mentioned, I personally am not a doctor. I consider myself to be an evangelist for the most prestigious and brilliant medical minds in the world. For example, these Harvard doctors in our film, Better. And what those doctors have shown us is that with modern science and with practical habits and with some powerful self-love, we truly can reverse the dual epidemics that we are now facing as a country. Actually, let's say 3 simultaneous epidemics. We have an epidemic of psychological problems that we're facing now, anxiety and depression. We have an epidemic of diabetes and obesity, known as diabesity. And then we have an epidemic of COVID. By choosing better foods, by choosing better thoughts, and by choosing better physical movements, which we explore in the movie Better, we can take the power back and we can live radically better.
His work has been endorsed and implemented by top doctors from Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and UCLA. He's the executive producer of the new food documentary, as he's been talking about, called Better. How do we see that film?
The easiest way is just to go to bettermovie.com. Again, that's bettermovie.com.
And then for SANE Solution, if anybody'd like to get a hold of you there?
SANESolution.com, SANE Solution.com.
just have about 30 seconds or so left. Is there anything else you want our listeners to know when we talk about COVID and diabetes and eating better?
The number one thing you can do when it comes to your health and ensuring you live the best life possible is simply to choose better quality foods and to love yourself better.
Jonathan Bailor, founder and CEO of the world's fastest growing evidence-based wellness program, SANESolution. And again, check out the new food documentary titled Better. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. We appreciate your help.
Thank you.